Good evening, I'm Glenda Chong, and tonight's top stories. Singapore and Vietnam pledge to expand economic cooperation. Both sides sign multiple deals with key focus on the green economy, digital space and innovation. The three presidential candidates make their case this hour at their first and only live television forum on what makes them the top pick as the next head of state. Strengthening Singapore's position as a trusted business hub, the nation is exploring ways to manage investments into critical entities to safeguard economic resilience and national security. And also tonight, China drops the last vestige of its COVID-19 control curbs. It's scrapping all forms of testing for travellers from abroad. Singapore and Vietnam signed 7 deals to strengthen economic cooperation and links in areas such as sustainability. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong is in Hanoi for a 3-day visit. He reaffirmed bilateral ties with his Vietnam counterpart Pham Minh Chinh. And Shalin Sia reports from the Vietnamese capital.
Starting the day with a mark of respect, as PM Lee laid a wreath to remember Vietnam's past leaders. Then, a grand welcome at the Presidential Palace, hosted by PM Chinh. A ceremony fitting for the occasion, as Singapore and Vietnam celebrate 5 decades of bilateral relations this year. Both Prime Ministers agreed to establish annual PM-to-PM meetings as a platform to discuss bilateral issues and topics of mutual concern. In addition to exploring an upgraded strategic partnership, the leaders also exchanged views on regional and international developments, such as Myanmar and the South China Sea. PM Lee also met other leaders like President Va Van Thong and the Communist Party of Vietnam General Secretary Nguyen Phu Trong. We also saw commitment from both sides to strengthen cooperation in emerging areas, with the signing of several agreements between the Singapore and Vietnam ministries. Some key areas of focus included the green economy, digital space and innovation. A total of 7 deals were signed, including one which facilitates manpower flows. A new program will enable Singaporeans and Vietnamese to seek working stints in innovation-related fields in each other's countries. Another deal covered sustainable urban development. Both sides also agreed on joint efforts for climate action and made progress on renewable energy talks. The two countries are exploring a proposal to export offshore wind energy from Vietnam to Singapore. There were also updates to existing agreements to boost education programs and government official study visits. Next on the agenda, more business and engagement events for PM Lee, together with PM Chinh. They'll be attending a groundbreaking event of several new collaborative industrial parks here in Vietnam and will also engage with youth leaders from both countries. Shalin Sia, CNA, Hanoi.
At an official dinner hosted by PM Chinh, both leaders also spoke of the need to uphold multilateralism in ASEAN. They took stock of 50 years of diplomatic ties and raised a toast to the Singapore-Vietnam partnership, dining alongside government officials from both sides.
As fellow ASEAN members, Singapore and Vietnam share a stake in the stability and prosperity of our region. And with rising geopolitical tensions, we must work even closer together to maintain ASEAN centrality and uphold the rules-based multilateral order. All these are strong reasons that give me confidence that our relations will continue to flourish for many decades to come.
Thưa Ngài Thủ tướng và Phu nhân quý mến, trải qua 50 năm với quyết tâm cao, nỗ lực chung, chúng ta đã cùng nhau gây dựng nên một quan hệ đối tác chiến lược sâu rộng, hiệu quả, tin cậy và bền vững, trở thành một điển hình mới của quan hệ năng động và hiệu quả trong ASEAN. Một hình mẫu về thúc đẩy các cơ chế hợp tác nội khối ở khu vực cũng như trên thế giới.
Home Affairs and Law Minister K. Shanmugam says Singapore's management of the recent money laundering case shows the country's zero tolerance for such crimes. 10 people of different nationalities were charged 2 weeks ago for their suspected involvement in the probe where assets worth 1 billion Sing dollars were seized or frozen.
We are not a place which would allow that kind of laundering. And I would say it's not easy to think of another center that has taken such action again and seized so much money and charged people. I'm struggling to think of another center that has done in the last 20, 30 years. That shows our determination, because there is enough clean, good money that is seeking out Singapore.
Mr. Shanmugam was speaking at a symposium organized by the Singapore International Arbitration Centre. He notes that the government is always willing to look at making sure arbitration is attractive internationally. And this could include changing laws and keeping up to date with events, as well as having a judiciary that is supportive but not interventionist. OCBC has fully restored their banking services after a morning outage. The bank is currently investigating the cause of the problem, but has assured customers that their monies remain safe. It stressed that no customers' data were compromised during the disruption. The bank first acknowledged the issue in a Facebook post at about 9:40 a.m., saying they had technical problems with mobile and online banking. About an hour later, ATM services were restored, followed by card and branch services. An OCBC spokesperson told CNA at 12:33 p.m. that all services have been restored. Campaigning is now into the final stretch, with the issue of the candidates' independence under the spotlight. Earlier in the day, Mr. Ng Kok Song said the politicization of the presidential election would not happen if it is non-partisan and none of the candidates are supported by a political party. He was speaking to the media a day after his rival, Mr. Tan Kin Lian, was endorsed by Progress Singapore Party Chairman Dr. Tan Cheng Bock. Mr. Ng says the alliance would only reinforce his campaign strategy to appeal to the voters as the only candidate without political affiliations. He called it a matter of urgency to have a non-partisan president.
If we don't do that at this presidential election, we are going to be trapped into this quagmire, into this quicksand, where every time there's a presidential election, it becomes a proxy, a general election. We must put a stop to it, Singaporeans. We must not allow this to continue, because to do so would compromise the office of the president.
Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam had also urged his fellow candidates to avoid politicizing the presidential election. In response to media queries about Dr. Tan's endorsement of Mr. Tan on Sunday, Mr. Tharman's campaign team adds that the focus should be on each candidate's individual character, breadth of experience and ability to contribute to Singapore's future as head of state. Mr. Tan Kin Lian is now backed by two former presidential candidates, Dr. Tan Cheng Bock and Mr. Tan Jee Sey. All three contested the 2011 presidential election. Mr. Ng, a former GIC chief investment officer, also had this to say about Mr. Tan's preference for revealing the size of Singapore's reserves if he's president. Mr. Ng was the only candidate who spoke to the media. Mr. Tan joined his team at Ang Mo Kio MRT station to kickstart the distribution of flyers. And now a live presidential forum is underway on CNA, hosted by my colleague Otelia Edwards. Let's listen in.
1.5 minutes, and this time we will start with Mr. Tharman. The elected president is a safeguard against the government misusing past reserves. Beyond what the government tells you, what factors would you consider before using the second key to past reserves? Your time starts now.
Unfortunately, from time to time, we're going to get crises. COVID was not the last of them. We may have major crises coming up our way. And the first thing the president has to understand is the nature of the crisis. Is this for the short term, or is this a crisis where we can't actually see the end of the crisis? We can't see the bottom to the crisis. The second key to allow for the reserves to be used is useful only where you cannot see the end of the crisis and you can't see the bottom to the crisis. But secondly, the money has to be spent wisely. And that means not just helping people to survive, which is of course very important, our firms, our SMEs and Singaporeans to survive the storm, but to build strengths in a crisis so that we emerge even stronger. That's critical to the wise use of our reserves in a crisis. But thirdly, it's got to be fair. If we're using our reserves in a crisis, if we're going to spend monies on Singaporeans and firms, it's got to be distributed fairly. So if we're saving jobs, we've got to make sure we help lower-income Singaporeans, middle-income Singaporeans, build up strengths for the recovery, build up new skills, new capabilities for the recovery. Don't just favor the big firms, don't just favor those who already have it good. Be fair.
Thank you, Mr. Tarman. Mr. Tan, you are next, and your time starts now.
The two key factors. I have two factors. The first is this use of the reserve in the interest of the people? And the second factor I will consider is this a proper use of the reserves? For example, is it spent unwisely or is it spent wisely? For example, our biggest use of past reserves was during the COVID. A large sum of money was set aside, and there was some part of the money that went into banks that were making huge profits, and they were given subsidy by the government. I consider that to be not suitable use of the reserves, and I don't want to say that this is looking back at the benefit of hindsight. I think the president should have the ability to understand what is proper use and what is the wrong use of the reserve. So I will certainly want to examine carefully, is this good for the people and is this the proper use of the reserves? Thank you.
Do you have anything else to add?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tan. Mr. Ng, it's your turn now, and your time starts now.
What other factors, should I consider when the government makes a request to draw on our past reserves? I think the critical thing is to understand that our past reserves should benefit present generations of Singaporeans as well as future generations. So how much to save and how much to spend is a very important decision. So I would like to know from the government, what is the total size of our reserves? How much are you asking to spend out of the reserves? What are the assumptions that the government is making regarding the crisis? Is it an international crisis, a domestic crisis? How long do you expect the crisis to last? Another question which I would ask is, have you exhausted the possibility of raising revenues from other areas before asking me, the President, for permission to draw on the past reserves? And also, quite importantly, I think we need to understand what are the assumptions that the government is using in regard to what are the expected returns on our reserves for the future. How does that compare with our historical rates of return on the reserves? So these are issues which I have been quite familiar with while working at the GIC.
And you've been watching a live presidential forum currently underway on CNA. You can catch a repeat telecast of the presidential forum in full tomorrow, right after News Tonight, and that's at 9:30 p.m. here on Channel 5. And still ahead on News Tonight, the Manpower Ministry to ramp up inspections to enhance safety at high-risk workplaces. We take a look at some examples of dangers to look out for. Plus, parts of Asia on alert for a super typhoon. It's tracking over the Philippine Sea and could impact Hong Kong and Taiwan later this week.
My Mitsubishi Electric StarMax aircon saves me energy and money. It's easy to clean and is so quiet.
The Trade and Industry Minister says Singapore needs to make sure investments into critical entities do not affect economic resilience and national security. Gan Kim Yong says this is to strengthen the country's position as a trusted hub for businesses to confidently invest in amid global challenges.
That is why Ministry of Trade and Industry is exploring new tools to allow us to manage significant investments into critical entities. And in fact, many countries around the world are already doing this. And we will reach out and engage industries to better understand their own perspectives and to work with them to minimize the impact on businesses and investments.
Mr. Gan was speaking on the sidelines of his ministry's economic dialogue. During his opening speech, he says some major powers have used state subsidies to incentivize strategic investments from within their own countries. He says that's how they reduce external exposure and mitigate perceived vulnerabilities amid geopolitical tensions. Mr. Gan adds it's important for Singapore to stay open.
We must strengthen our economic connectivity to access new markets and customers and bring in new knowledge and ideas. Singapore must resist the pressure to turn inward and become more protectionist. We have always earned our living by remaining open, expanding our economic space, and stay connected to the world.
In regional news now, the US and China have agreed to launch a working group to find solutions on trade and investment issues, as well as advance US commercial interests in China. Washington says the agreement was reached during the meeting between US and Chinese commerce chiefs Gina Raimondo and Wang Wentao in Beijing. The group will meet biannually starting early next year. Both sides have also agreed to launch a channel to give Beijing a potential forum to express trade concerns in a bid to reduce misunderstanding of American security policies. The first in-person talks will start tomorrow. During the meeting with her Chinese counterpart, Ms. Raimondo described economic ties between the nations as the most significant in the world. She stressed how profoundly important it was to maintain stable relations. Ms. Raimondo also noted that although it is a complicated and challenging relationship, she believes Washington and Beijing can make progress if the two sides are direct, open, and practical. Ms. Raimondo's visit is the latest in a series of high-level trips taken by US officials to China as Washington and Beijing work towards cooling trade tensions. But some analysts are skeptical that the talks will bring about any thaw in relations. Ties between the world's two biggest economies plunged to their worst in decades after Washington's recent trade curbs. And just this month, US President Joe Biden issued an executive order restricting some American investments in sensitive high-tech areas like semiconductors and artificial intelligence in China. Beijing blasted the move as being anti-globalization. Travelers to China will no longer need a pre-departure antigen test for COVID-19. The Foreign Ministry confirmed the move will take effect Wednesday, marking a milestone for the country as it dismantles the last of its coronavirus travel measures.
自2023年8月30日起，来华人员无需进行入境前新冠病毒核酸或抗原检测。
China has been relaxing COVID-19 measures this year. It dropped its PCR test requirement in April, stating that the easing was in accordance with the current situation of the pandemic and would help facilitate people-to-people exchanges. Super Typhoon Saola is barreling towards Hong Kong and Taiwan. It has lashed northern Philippines with powerful winds and heavy rain. More than 2,000 people have fled their homes after floods swept through rural villages. Power cuts are affecting the province of Cagayan. Now, authorities say more floods and landslides are expected in the coming days. Saola is the 7th tropical storm to hit the Philippines this year. Saola is currently tracking towards the Taiwan Strait. Weather agencies warn it could hit Hong Kong this week as well. The city's officials are assessing the need to raise a storm warning. Thai Prime Minister-designate Srettha Thavisin says his cabinet lineup is finalized. The list will go to the Cabinet Secretary-General for vetting before being proposed for royal approval. The whole process could take a few days. Mr. Srettha says Members of the 11-party coalition agreed on the cabinet roster last night. He revealed no names for ministers and refused to comment on speculation that the new defence minister would be a civilian. Such an appointment could signal a reduced role for the military in government after its dominance since the 2014 coup. And coming up on News Tonight, how digitalization in preschools is helping teachers reduce workload and enhance communications. Details after the short break.
Weather report brought to you by Mitsubishi Electric.
Higher risk industries like construction and manufacturing can expect more safety spot checks over the next 2 months. The Manpower Ministry will step up inspections by 50%. It says early investigations show there are lapses once again. MOM lifted a heightened safety period at the end of May. It was imposed after workplace-related fatalities hit a 6-year high last year. Well, for instance, this construction site is fresh cause for concern. CNA tagged along today for a surprise spot check on the 35 Gilstead condominium project. Safety lapses found include a lack of proper staircases and only a ladder to climb to higher floors. No barriers either, as people worked many stories above ground. And there were large metal debris that could trip workers over. Contractor Trinity Construction has already been issued a stop work order.
Our investigation into workplace incidents uncovered a general lack of ownership and emphasis on workplace safety and health. Basic control measures are not in place, as we have witnessed at this worksite today. In some incidents, we found workers not following proper safety procedures. We therefore call on all employers and workers to make workplace safety and health a top priority.
More than 60% or 300 preschool operators have adopted digital solutions under a grant by the Early Childhood Development Agency, or ECDA. The $4 million funding was launched in 2021 to help reduce the workload of teachers, for example. And going forward, the agency wants to use digitalization to attract more educators.
More time for teachers to conduct singing and dancing sessions. One of the aims of the digitalization grant is to pull teachers away from routine tasks like taking attendance or checking the children's temperatures before class. Another plus, communication becomes easier. Any information is made known instantaneously to parents as well as colleagues via online means.
It really eases teachers' time, and they can actually spend more time with the children and managing them and looking into the development, right? Previously, it was all very manual work that we have to do, and with the system, it's actually so easy that it's accessible even through their handphones, right? And yeah, so that it's really they could facilitate.
Using data like staff-to-child ratio, this operator can easily deploy teachers more effectively across its centres.
At the same time, we would also want to encourage preschool operators to do data analytics on top of the data collection. Finally, we would like to see preschool operators use it as a platform to recruit more teachers into the preschool sector, as well as to embark on training modules for the teachers.
More teachers could mean more celebrations like this.
And that's News Tonight. Join us again tomorrow. Have a good evening.
This program is available on demand for free on Me